one of those like from the jump chaos. But it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. So today I am going to make live chat. I always, well, it's like I never forget, but I'm like I always forget. Um, I am going to be making, because it's been chaos this morning. I don't know if it's because we slept in, because for the first time since we've got the new puppy, we've been able to like sleep in the bed together. And I mean like literally sleep. We just like slept better, I think, because we were next to each other, and so it was like, oh my god, it's 7:30. That doesn't sound very late to the average person, but we don't typically sleep in past much past 6, and so the whole morning is like, oh my god, I'm late to a very important date, and then the milker stopped functioning, and Betty, or milk goat, was like full to like literally bursting, just squirting out milk because we've started separating for kid share. So that's where like the kids have her all day until nighttime, and then we take her away, milk her in the morning, give her back to the kids. So she's like, she was ready, and then the milker wasn't working, and I was like, ah. So anyhow, I'm here now, and I'm going to be making my this ruby GABA that I talked about during yesterday's tea time. It's an oolong tea. The thing about to remember is that white tea, green tea, black tea, oolong tea, they're all the same plant, Camellia sinensis, right? They're all the same tea plant. It's just how they've been processed. And I've been really enjoying this ruby GABA one. This is specially processed oolong for high GABA, over 250 milligrams of GABA per 100 grams. It has underlying tastes of roasted coconut, burnt pine depth with a rosehip acidity and lingering eucalyptus sweetness. This is from that same brand I was using yesterday, the Me Leaf, MEILEAF, Me Leaf. Now this one's a bit different. Some of you have always noticed that doesn't look like my water is very hot, and that's because there's different temperatures that you're using for different types of tea. Oolongs take damn near boiling water, and just a little bit of time and not a whole lot of herb is going to go into here. So check it out. Oolong ends up being kind of like they've rolled the leaves, right? But they're going to open up. They're going to open up just fine. Oh yeah, yellow tea. Someone asked if I had yellow tea. Yellow tea is really nice. I also like a good purple. Purple's probably my favorite. But this one also is not going to brew for as long. So this is pretty much boiling water. It was like I needed it to like 2.9 or 2.10, and it boils at 2.12. So I just boil it and then take it off for a few minutes, right? And then this one only gets 2 minutes, so I'm gonna have to eye it. But yeah, I thought maybe I'd give myself a little bit of a calming tea. There's plenty of caffeine in oolong, but again, the L-theanine on top of these extra like large GABA levels is really interesting. Now, if you're coming off of benzos, don't fuck around with a ruby GABA, right? Or anything that's going to stimulate GABA, because it'll make your symptoms worse. I talked about that a lot yesterday, so I won't dive into it too hard today. But today's garden talk. Oh, I always forget to do it. I have, hopefully this weekend, if things go as planned, um, this whole back room is going to change substantially. And when that happens, um, I'll have things more at my fingertips, and I won't forget, and it'll be more comfortable, and I'm excited about it. I'm hopeful that I stay in the camera, but I'm hopeful that this weekend I'll be able to focus on that, because I've been doing a lot of I caught up on gardening yesterday. So yesterday I spent like 5 hours, probably not that much, probably like 2. Right? I spent like 2 hours at least, like repotting a bunch of tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, and I potted up my ginger that I had rooted, all the little nodes, and then I potted up a bunch of rhubarb, and I planted a bunch of like perpetual beet greens outside. But I had to make the hard decision. So I had gotten this seed soil, like seed starting soil. It was supposed to be high quality stuff. I hate it. I threw out an entire flat of tomato seedlings yesterday because they were horrendous. I would rather restart a little late than try to get those starts back to healthy because they'll always be stunted, right? Arguably, they would grow slower than if I restarted. So, with a heavy heart, I was like, I'm sorry, boop. But I just dumped them, into the compost pile. The problem is I think there was too much perlite in the mix. So what would happen is the soil would dry out really quickly because that's what perlite does, right? And then I'd have to water. But then you water so much that they're like stripping the nutrients from the plants, even if you're putting fertilizer in it. And then they're like, oh, I'm being overwatered, but also by the next morning I'll be dried out. And I'm like, nope. So like a lot of the plants that I did save and repot because they were doing better, I didn't even like repot them into something bigger. I just gave them new soil. So it was like a bunch of like tedious work that I wouldn't have had to do if that initial potting soil didn't suck. Suck so bad. I have slightly oversteeped. We will find out. The good thing about oolongs though is they're much more forgiving than like a green or a white. If you over steep with like a green or a white, you'll end up with really high tannins like drying in your mouth, right? Or like bitterness. But like a black tea or even like a pu'er or oolong, you don't really get that bitterness or tannins because it's already been processed. But look at the color of her. Ruby matches my dress, but also is that color on her own. Ruby GABA is the tea I'm drinking today. Oh, I love it so much. See, to me, it's like nutty and warm, and it tastes like what I assume an almond bloom smells like. It's like, and this will sound stereotypical probably, but it really makes me crave like good sushi. Like I just think this would taste amazing next to like eel. I like eel. I like eel a lot. But we don't really have good sushi around here. We have to drive. It's a drive, so we just dream about it often. And if we ever happen to be in that area where there's like this really amazing sushi restaurant, I'm like, oh, sushi, But um, oh, I love it so much. It's like very, very comforting and earthy. And like, how do I say this will sound weird, but it tastes like the earth, like dirt, but not like it tastes like dirt. It's almost like the smell of like when the soil starts waking up in the spring, like you imagine that's what it would taste like. And it's just, oh, fantastic. I saw somebody say they love eel. Oh my god, it's my favorite thing. I love eel so much. We have lamprey eel here in our river, but you got to be enrolled to catch them. But a bunch of my family and things like that are, so I end up getting a stash of them because a lot of people don't like to eat them anymore. They think they're gross, but you have to know how to prepare them. But it's been a year or two since I've gotten any because the numbers are low and you can't harvest if the numbers are low. But yeah, it's got such a nice mouthfeel. I don't typically like oolongs, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna try some Taiwanese oolongs because this is like a Taiwanese tea, and it has just been. I'm waiting for a milky oolong to show up, but not one that had milk solids sprayed on it, like a real milky oolong, and I'm excited about trying her. Um, so yeah, it's pretty big garden day yesterday. Will likely be as well today. It's been raining and cold here, but all of my chard and my kale and my spinach and my collards and my come on brain chard. No, I said chard already. There's so many out there, but they're all doing really well. They didn't grow at first. I don't know, it took them a minute to get happy, but now they're like poof, taking off. And I ended up finally getting the wood chips down in the garden and planting all of the oyster mushroom mycelium before I put the wood chips down over the straw that I put in. Um, and I feel like that has helped a lot because it's helping retain moisture. Um, and they have just taken off. It'll probably in another week or two I'll be able to start like sparingly harvest some greens, right? Um, but I'm pretty excited. I planted yesterday. They call them like I got it from it's called Experimental Farm Network, and they had these like perpetual beet leaves, right? So like a lady in Alaska or Canada, I can't recall. It says on the packet. I think it's Canada. Um, she grew beets in such a way that she was breeding just for the greens. A lot of people don't realize that you can eat beet leaf. They're very tasty green, but you're restricted by you can only have those greens while the beet is growing, right? And a lot of people don't over harvest that, and then you have to harvest your beet relatively young, blah 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 blah. This lady figured out how to make this. Basically it's edible, but it's just like this gnarly beetroot that nobody wants to eat. It's tough, but it lives for like 3 to 5 years, and these it constantly gives up leaf after leaf after leaf, and I'm really excited about that. I mean, I'm gonna grow normal beets too, but I planted these in a potter alongside with like this tree collard, so it's collard greens that get real tall and big and are perennial, so it'll just be like layers of greens that I can harvest, right? Um, so I'm pretty excited about that. And that was as easy as I took that shitty potting soil that I didn't like and I spread it out over the top of this planter that had plenty of other dirt in it. But it is good for starting seeds. It just doesn't hold moisture in like an indoor environment very well. And so as soon as I see those little beet leaves pop and they're up a little bit, I'll put wood chips over it to help stop that potting soil from drying out. But and then I started a bunch of it's from the same company, the Experimental Farm Network. I don't remember the name that they called the rhubarb, but it they go around and they find like all these really old varieties of things growing on like abandoned farms and things like that. And they said they came across this rhubarb, and they've been growing it for a while now. That is like stalks like 2 inches, like big fat stalks and huge leaves. And I love rhubarb. Like since I was a kid, like I will just sit there and eat rhubarb with salt. If you've never done raw rhubarb with salt, you don't know what you're missing. But also, did you know that women like the taste of rhubarb more than men? Like I've seen, like my husband loves sour things. When we were younger, I was like, dude, you are gonna lose your teeth. Quit, with the citric acid type candy like sour heads and things like that, warheads. But man couldn't handle rhubarb. He can't eat it raw. It's like raw. He's like, this is not. And I'm like, oh, it's so good. And I came across a study forever ago, and I've heard people talk about it for a long time too. Like women love the taste of like raw rhubarb, but men don't, and I find that really interesting. Um, it's probably something to do with like the way we like taste, see, smell things differently than men, even though nobody talks about that a whole lot. Um, yeah, raw rhubarb with some salt on it. Wow. Fantastic. Also, okay, don't get me wrong. I love a good strawberry rhubarb jam, but you have not lived until you've made rhubarb blackberry jam. Oh my gosh, that is like the best thing in the world. And we have invasive blackberries here. So, right next to our driveway, where our well was put in, there's like a ditch that they dug underneath there to take it to the well house. It's in our garage, right? And so there's always like a moist area right there, and so blackberries have taken over, and it is massive, and it's the one patch that I don't like decimate and allow to exist because it's right by the driveway. It's easy to contain, and when the goats get to the bottom layer of it, it makes it to where the berries are just on top, so we can just do this. We can just get to them. Other years, if I remember to water them, they're better than the years that I don't. But yeah, rhubarb is probably one of my favorite fruits. Like, if you make me a rhubarb pie, you also need to make yourself a rhubarb pie because I'm just gonna eat that pie. You're gonna be like, here, would you like a piece? And I'd be like, thanks, take the whole pie. I love it. I love it so much. Um, but yeah, so I'm excited for that rhubarb. I did order some second and third year rhubarb crowns this year off of Etsy because when you first grow rhubarb, you can't really harvest it the first and arguably the second year. Um, And we had put them in these big 10-gallon pots, like, so we didn't have to plant them right then and there. We were getting ready for it. But now they're up. Now they're up and doing their thing, and so they get to live in those 10-gallon pots probably until fall. Maybe even till spring, because I don't really want to necessarily disturb them in fall. I don't know. I'll think about it. How do I make my rhubarb pies? Just like any other pie. My mom has a really good crust recipe. My mom, for years, on the side of like doing three other jobs, she was a baker, and then she finally got like a pastry maker. Like she made pies. That's what she did. She could do cookies and everything else, but like pie was life. And so, and this one place that she worked there for about 5 or 6 years. That's what her job was, to make pies. But the guy she worked for was a real fucking asshole. Like he owned the place, and he was just like, he had this dream of owning a restaurant, but like managing one. Like not knowing how to cook or do any of that stuff, just yelling at people, right? And so, but she worked there for a long time. It was called the Cookie Tree, and he had a rule to once a month she had to come up with a new pie. Right, that's a pretty big pressure if you think about like all the pies that already exist. So she she was constantly making pies, like, and coming up, like, I really like her blue goose pie. That's like a blueberry gooseberry kind of like French cream mix, and it's like somehow sweet and sour at the same time, but much like a French cream. But also, where did that custard come from? It's such good. It's such good. So I use her crust recipe, but a good old rhubarb is like, you could either make it into a custard, which is, or you could cook it raw into it, or you could make your pie filling first and then just cook it long enough that your crust is done, or you could pre-bake, like blank bake your crust, and then you could just add in the pie filling and let it cool. So it just depends on how you want to do it. But custard has been my thing lately. And like an easy French custard too, not like having to bake it in the oven. What is that guy's name? It's like Jack Poupon. I don't know. He used to have a cooking show. He has he has these books called like Fast Food My Way, and there's no fast food about it. I mean, it's just quick recipes. And there's this like basic, like, easy French stovetop custard in there that is, I've customized it so many ways. I've made like, so what I'll do is I'll make the custard and like the little half pint like jelly jars, right? And you put the layer of the custard, and then you like cook down some like fruit into like a compote, and I'll like thicken it with just a little bit of like grass-fed beef gelatin, and then you put that over the top and you let them chill, and it's like, I made them for like every holiday this winter, and I'm like, oh, this one, like, I've done like a Meyer lemon custard with like a raspberry topping, or like blueberry lemon, or like, I can't wait to do like a blackberry rhubarb. I'm all for it. And people get afraid of these foods. But the thing is, custard is like super nutritious if you're making it yourself, because it's tons of egg yolks, which are loaded with things like retinol, B vitamins, folate. It's really amazing stuff, right? And then if you use a high quality milk, you get basically every vitamin that's ever needed. Right, with milk on top of the calcium and things like that, and then it's just fruit on top of it. And if you're using gelatin to thicken it, you've got all those amazing amino acids. And you could use honey if you wanted to. I always just use cane sugar. I'm not afraid. Like, your body, it's like, energy is energy. But it's just like, if I was like sick and dying, please feed me custard. It'll bring me back. It'll bring me back to my, yeah, I'm hungry, I'm sitting. We're gonna talk about like garden stuff, but what we do with the food after the garden. Right? But somebody said, I know someone who developed major allergies towards oyster mushrooms after growing them indoors. Didn't know for many months, but finally narrowed it down. Yeah, the thing about wild mushrooms is that they're not necessarily meant, or any food, to be eaten like every day, all day. You can actually do that with any type of food. So I suspect your friend was eating a shit ton of oyster mushrooms, right? But I also wonder, like, okay, well, what substrate was he growing them on? Was the straw covered in glyphosates? Was, you know what I mean? And so your body ends up being like, oh, this is a threat because I have it too often. It's why, like, a lot of cultures that, like, went through, like, genocide or, like, removal and things like that, they were forced to eat, like, one particular food. And now, generations later, like, their grandkids and great grandkids can't eat that food at all. Like, it's either, like, lactose or wheat or rice, milk, proteins, not just the lactose, right? Like in my culture, we have this like gout mutation. It's crazy. Where if you're a traveler and you have a baby, like it's really good to get tested for that because there's odds are good that like you'll breastfeed and then suddenly your baby goes septic and dies and you don't know why. And it's because we can become like septic from the milk proteins. It's like lactose intolerance to the max, right? Um, and so I carry that gene. I do. There's different levels of it, and so but it's crazy. We always joke. My grandma's like, it's some sort of curse, some sort of curse on our people because like, what world is like do you live in where like if you give birth and breastfeed your baby it dies, right? But a lot of it's because when we were like displaced and pushed off, at least my theory is, we were only given like leave out the milk and they'll do the work, right? And so for a long time we had nothing but milk. And so our body probably started to see it as a danger, the same way where your friend ate nothing but oyster mushrooms probably too often and saw it as a danger, or people who have survived like generations after the Holocaust often can't eat rice, or like lots of natives have like severe gluten allergies, like life threatening, because they right? And so that shit's crazy. And actually, the gout gene, the one that makes you like allergic to like milk proteins, are really only found in Irish travelers, one random tribe in Africa that I can't remember the name of, and a Navajo Nation. Like three of us are like fucked over from milk, you know. And so it's crazy stuff. But we're actually going down the rabbit hole of that with my daughter right now with her protein intolerance. So, but it's hard because living in the U.S., like when you hear traveler, you think that I'm somebody who travels, right? You don't know that like we're an actual recognized as of 2017 ethnic minority. Like we finally got human status and rights. But in the U.S., you don't really know about us, and if you Google us, it's nothing but like pure hate and racism and like, you know, what happens when people don't know about a thing, they fear a thing, right? So it's it's super interesting stuff that has nothing to do with the garden. But I'm excited about the rhubarb. I also have one more variety of potato to get planted. I'm waiting for my son to come home to get done with that. He's been at my dad's for like, or my parents for like a week now because he had to, his head gasket blew in his truck, so he had to rebuild his, you know, strip his motor back and put a new gasket on and put it all back. And I'm pretty proud that at 20 he can do that. Right. I know grown ass men that can't change oil or a flat tire. Right. And so I'm really proud that, you know, I get to be like, yeah, my what is he? Is he a Gen Z? I don't even know anymore. I can't keep up. He was born in the 2000s and he can completely fix a head gasket in a truck, take it all apart, put it back together, you know. But when he gets back, it just goes faster if it's like me, my husband, him filling these barrels for the potatoes. And my back hurts and I'm getting old, so I'll wait for him to get back. I think he's coming back today because he was showing me videos of being able to drive it and excitedly talking about what other parts he wants to put in it. Right, like it's such a good, it's such a good skill to have to be able to work on engines or small motors or anything like that. You know. Yeah, I see a bunch of people saying they can't do milk anymore either. Sometimes it's like with the gout thing, it's like it's not like you just shit your brains out. Like if my daughter, we think she might have level one, and there's three levels of it, right? Uh, it would be like she would have to be like on a really low protein diet for like the rest of her life. But it could also like eventually make her go septic, right? Which is like blood poisoning. Basically, your body can't break down the proteins, so the proteins enter your bloodstream, and then you go septic. Because that's what happens when things get into your bloodstream that aren't supposed to be there. But um, I hope not. I mean, we've been working on it. I have to save up for the genetic testing it's like fucking $800 for just the one test. Like, so I can do a DNA test to see if she's a carrier, but then I also have to like see if like it's active, and that's a whole different test. So this one's $500. This one's like 800 some odd dollars, right? And then I have to try to take that um, and walk into a doctor who is just gonna look at us like we're fucking crazy, act dumb, and be like, "Oh wow, look." Right, because I might need to get things for her that I can't get myself, which is frustrating, but it's crazy shit. Um, but yeah, garden. I do plan on. I had a strawberry bed, a really nice strawberry bed, and then I had pigs that got out. Little bastards. They got out of a big, nice, beautiful area. They were a bunch of teenage male pigs. They are like a pack. And they discovered the strawberry patch and just ripped it to shit. So probably what I in that, and then I was like, fine, fuck it, and I didn't garden last year. So like they were there, the strawberries were kind of there, but like a lot of weeds grew in, and so what I need to do is go and dig up the little strawberries that are existing, like weed the whole thing, put down a layer of like wood chips and straw, and then replant the strawberries. It won't be enough strawberries like I used to have. It was a big patch. It had been there for like 3 years. We were coming into our prime, and these fucking teenagers, they were tasty, you know. Um, but somebody said Crampton, please. Nah, that shit's toxic, addictive. It's gonna destroy your life just as much as opium is. Oh, and by the way, there's zero regulations, even though the FDA is trying to turn it into like an illegal drug, and it's often horrendously contaminated with pesticides and heavy metals. So if the addiction doesn't get you, the chemicals will. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty excited about the garden this year, and I know that I may or may not get everything that I want to get done. I know that. But I feel like I'm making headway, that I'm like being okay with pacing myself. I've got half of my mushrooms planted already. I've got the poplar trees taken down. You know, I've got space opened up. Today, because it's not hot out, I probably plant the rest of my onions and just kind of maybe prepare the bed for beets, the other beets, the normal beets. You know, I'm kind of just like slowly going, and I'm excited because a lot of the work that I'm doing now will benefit future April in the way that a lot of it's perennial. So, like, half of the work that I'm doing this year for the garden, I won't have to do again next year. Right? And so that is a big deal because not only will I not have to do the work next year, I will have the same plants available. And that's what I love about perennials. And I've been digging up and moving things in too. I'm like, hey, catnip, I know that you like to grow way over here on the other side of the property, but I'm going to take about half of you and plant you right by my door. Right? Like, oh, hey, how's it going? You know, Yarrow, I'm going to take a clump of you and put you here. And they're already on the land, but I'm trying to, like, move everything into, like, April doesn't have to walk or go so far zones, right? Um, but, you know, it also increases, like, the little biozone around my house, you know, that's really helpful. And, oh, I got the perennial beets from the Experimental Farm Network. That's what they're called. They have a lot of great stuff on there, and it was like they call it like gnarly beet, like gnarly beet greens or something like that. They say that you could probably eat the beet when it was really young, but then it would kill the plant. And sometimes they'll go to seed, so you'll get more seed, and then they'll just keep growing, and that's fantastic. So I'm really looking into that. I've also got I always say it wrong. Dietrich's broccoli, like rabbi type broccoli, like where it's like the little spears and you eat the whole thing or the leaves, right? I've got a bunch of that because well, it's not really perennial so much as it aggressively self seeds, so it might as well be a perennial. And then I've got, oh, what was it? It's some, I can't remember the name of the chard. They were calling it like perpetual spinach, but it's actually a chard, but it tastes like a spinach, and it's just like the Dietrich, I always say it wrong, broccoli stuff, where it self seeds really aggressively, so I don't really have to worry about planting it again. Basically, eventually about a half acre, which is what I'm planting around my house, will just be its own garden. And it won't even look like I'm necessarily doing anything. And I hope that it spreads and we'll be like, okay, food, 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 you know, and a lot of greens for sure. But what is my way of getting rid of weeds? Well, I have a hard time looking at them as weeds because the vast majority of the time they're medicinal, edible, they're for a reason. But also, I'm doing like the the deep mulch method. I'm doing like a hybrid of like lasagna gardening, of just a bunch of layers of different like growable material, and then thick wood chips, fresh wood chips, like the back to Eden method. I know a lot of people like the back to Eden method, and I think it's fantastic. It works for a lot of people. But where I live, because it gets really, really hot in the summertime and it gets really, really cold in the wintertime, it doesn't really super compost well. Like the wood chips don't break down like they would in like a moist, humid environment, right? So it would take years for it to turn into like any amount of real soil for me to plant into. However, I can build soil on top of my clay like 80% unworkable. It would take a decade to make a dent in this clay. But if I build compost type beds on top of it and then put the wood chips over top of it, it will help break down underneath and make my own soil. I couldn't just rely on a little bit of compost and the wood chips like some people can with the back to Eden method. And I know there are a million and one videos telling you, oh, what's not working, you're doing it wrong. But bioregions are different. Not everything will work the same way. So I think putting together the lasagna bed method on top of the back to Eden method is going to be really effective. But also, it really prevents weeds, right? Unless you have like Bermuda grass, which we have creeping grass. I think sometimes um, people don't think about different types of invasive things. And around here, they decided in the 80s that it would be amazing to plant Bermuda grass because it's almost impossible to kill. It really is. I mean, and you don't have to water it a whole lot. So if you're looking to have a normal yard, but you'll never get rid of it because it spreads from rhizomes. So it's not like other grasses and weeds where it's like if a seed gets in, it then grows if it has access to soil. It's like, oh, you buried me and I'm just gonna grow and pop up everywhere. um, but I just kind of pull it out as will and cut it back. And sometimes when I cut it back, I think of it as adding fertility because I just leave the clippings wherever they're at and then they compost, right? Um, but uh, but yeah, that's my plan. Although I have been battling fucking star thistle in my greenhouse because it came up with the soil we brought in. But they're pretty easy when they're young if I just swoop under with a glove because they're pokey and pull it up by the root. As long as I don't let it go to seed, I won't have any past this year. I am frustrated though because I bought unsprayed straw from a farmer, right? And it needs to be straw, not hay, because hay has a lot of seeds in it. This bastard must have just sold me hay because I'm growing a wheat crop in my garden now, in my greenhouse. I've been pulling it back, chopping it back, and if I do that enough, it'll die off. It won't come back once it gets hotter. But it's frustrating because I bought straw specifically because I didn't want all that wheat seed in there. Because wheat is really cool to grow for food, but if it's in your garden, it'll shade everything. And they come back pretty strongly. You could grow a crop of wheat and you could mow it and it will just grow back right throughout the season. So I cut it back aggressively before I put the wood chips down. So now I'm only seeing some pop up, areas where it wasn't as thick. So I'll just keep selectively. But by next year, there won't be anything growing in that greenhouse that I don't intend to have um, in that greenhouse. Will sunflowers clean up soil? Yeah, any plant, sunflowers and mushrooms do really well. If you have like a really nasty area where your soil is bad, you could grow a bunch of wine cap mushrooms, but then don't eat the mushrooms because they're pulling up the heavy metals and the toxins. But honestly, if my soil was contaminated to the point that I needed to like grow something to clean it, it would take a really long time. Right. I would probably just move to container gardening or raised beds, right? You can work on cleaning it in the meantime, but it's going to take, 5-10 years before you might send off a soil sample and see if it's safe to grow in. Um, but yeah, so today started out relatively hectic, but I intensity talked my way through it with you about, you know, gardens and tea and all kinds of just random stuff that comes out of my mind as I flow. And I'm really grateful to have this outlet in the morning. I'm sure my husband is too, so I don't have to talk his ear off constantly. And I really appreciate everybody being here with me. These tea times have had a huge impact on my life, and it's only been like barely over a month. It has been changing and impactful and meaningful, and like it's good for my mental health and my physical health and everything else. So if you would like to support my capacity to be here with you, to have tea times, to teach freely, to keep tea in my pot and a roof over my head, consider becoming a member. It's just a way to throw me a couple bucks every month. There's nothing hidden behind a paywall in case you can't afford to join. I do give early access to videos. If I happen to upload one during the week instead of the weekend, I do have one up right now about growing wine cap mushrooms in your garden. But if you can't afford, don't worry, it'll be released on the weekend. So it's more of a just a time wall than a paywall. You can also call something home from my apothecary. I make all kinds of things: herbal synergism capsules, mouth mud, deodorant. I've got tons of books, and you can use the one-time code TEATIME, TEATIME, and that will save you 10% off of anything in the apothecary, and all of it supports my capacity to exist because it's solely what we do for a living. If you can't do any of that, or even if you can, it is super helpful if you like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share. Sharing is super important because it helps other people realize that they are smart enough to do this too. It gets my work out there. It tells the powers that be that my videos are worth showing to the people who actually subscribe to me and things like that. And all of that is super, super helpful, and it allows me to be here with you every morning and teach freely and just be a human and things like that. Tomorrow, I should have mentioned, tomorrow is the live Q&A, the Friday Herbal Health Q&A, where all tea time. For 30 minutes, I answer your questions. So that is tomorrow morning, and I hope to see everybody then, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.